I never imagined that the woman I hired to clean my home would one day destroy my marriage and take away the life I built for decades. My husband, the man I trusted with my soul, fell in love with her. And when I confronted the truth, he did something I could never forgive. He forced me out of my own home. This is not just my story. It's a reminder that betrayal often comes from the people we least expect. Stay with me until the end to see how I faced the ultimate heartbreak and what choice I made when I had nothing left. My name is Clara Bennett, and for 22 years, I believed I had a stable, loving marriage with my husband, Richard Bennett. We built a life together in a quiet suburban neighborhood, raising 2 children who had recently gone off to college. I thought this stage of life would finally bring us peace, a time to enjoy what we had worked so hard for. But life has a cruel way of shattering illusions. I had been struggling with constant fatigue. The house felt larger and emptier without the kids, and chores seemed endless. Richard suggested we hire someone to help with the cleaning. I hesitated. I had always been proud of managing the home myself, but he insisted, saying, "You've carried this family long enough, Clara. You deserve a break." It sounded thoughtful. It sounded loving. I agreed. A week later, Richard introduced me to a young woman named Isabella Ruiz. She was in her early 30s, polite, with a soft smile that made her seem trustworthy. "She'll only be here a few hours a day," Richard assured me. At first, Isabella was everything I hoped for: efficient, respectful, and eager to help. Slowly, I began to trust her. Sometimes I even left her in charge of small tasks when I had errands. I had no reason to doubt her intentions until the atmosphere in my own home started to change. Richard became distant. His eyes no longer sought mine when he returned from work. Conversations between us grew shorter, colder. But when Isabella was around, I noticed a spark in his demeanor. He smiled more, joked lightly, even lingered in the kitchen when she was cleaning. At first, I dismissed it. "He's just being kind," I told myself. "Don't overthink it." But my heart was not convinced. The first real crack appeared one evening when I walked into the living room. Isabella was dusting the shelves, and Richard stood far too close, pointing out something trivial about a photo frame. Their laughter stopped the moment I entered. The silence that followed was louder than any confession. Still, I doubted myself. I wanted so badly to believe I was wrong. But then came the night that stripped away every excuse. Richard thought I was asleep. I heard his voice in the study, soft and full of emotion I hadn't heard directed at me in years. "Isabella, I don't know how I survived before you. You've brought light back into my life." My breath caught. My chest ached as if someone had struck me. There was no misunderstanding those words. My husband, my partner of 2 decades, was in love with another woman, and not just any woman, the one I had welcomed into my home. I stood frozen, gripping the wall to keep myself upright. The betrayal burned through me, but beneath the pain, a storm of questions raged. How long had this been happening? Was I blind or just too trusting? And the most painful question of all, what did this mean for us? That night, I couldn't close my eyes. The bed I once shared with Richard felt like a battlefield. I knew my marriage was crumbling, and the walls of the home I had cherished were no longer mine. But I had no idea that the worst was yet to come. Richard wasn't just in love with Isabella, he was planning a future with her. And soon, I would be the one left outside, staring at the life I had built, no longer welcome in it. Clara Bennett always believed her marriage to Richard was built on loyalty and respect. For nearly 10 years, she had been the steady hand behind his ambitions, the patient ear when his temper flared, and the loving wife who managed their home. But slowly, the cracks began to show. They weren't dramatic at first, just subtle shifts that Clara's intuition could sense even before her mind could fully process them. It started with Richard's late nights. He claimed his company was expanding, that new clients demanded extra time and energy. Clara wanted to be supportive, so she accepted his excuses without pressing too hard. Still, a part of her felt uneasy when she noticed his phone always locked, his briefcase never left unattended, and his once warm conversations replaced by distracted nods. He was present in body, but his mind seemed elsewhere. The first real moment of alarm came when Clara noticed the cleaner. Isabella Ruiz, lingering longer than necessary after her shifts. At first, Isabella was polite, quiet, and efficient. Clara had even appreciated how thorough she was in her work. But as the weeks passed, Clara saw little changes. Isabella laughing a bit too freely at Richard's jokes, Richard complimenting her appearance more than seemed appropriate, and whispered exchanges that stopped abruptly when Clara walked into the room. Clara tried to convince herself she was imagining things. After all, wasn't it cruel to assume betrayal without proof? But then came the day she found one of Richard's ties draped over the back of the cleaner's chair. It wasn't in the laundry basket where it belonged. It wasn't in their bedroom. It was sitting like a bold, silent confession in the most unlikely place. When Clara confronted Richard, his reaction was quick and defensive. He accused her of paranoia, claiming she was disrespecting the woman who worked so hard for their home. His tone wasn't just defensive, it was angry, as though Clara had committed an offense by even questioning him. That night, Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Something inside her told her that Richard's lies were growing deeper. The betrayal became clearer with each passing week. Isabella's hours increased without Clara's approval. She began arriving early, staying late, and sometimes even taking dinner in their kitchen. Richard acted as though it was the most natural thing in the world, brushing off Clara's protests as though she were being unreasonable. The most humiliating moment came during a family gathering when Clara overheard her own cousin whispering, "It looks like Richard is awfully comfortable with the cleaner." The words burned in her chest. She forced a smile, pretending not to hear, but inside she was breaking. Clara realized she was slowly being pushed out of her own home. Decisions about the house, what meals were cooked, what furniture was rearranged, even what curtains were hung, were now influenced by Isabella. Richard praised her for her taste and energy, while dismissing Clara's input as outdated. It was as if the very walls that once echoed with Clara's laughter were now erasing her presence, brick by brick. Yet despite her pain, Clara's spirit refused to collapse. She knew she needed clarity, evidence that her instincts weren't wrong. She began keeping a quiet journal, noting every inconsistency, every late-night arrival, every exchange that didn't sit right with her. With each entry, her resolve grew. She was not just a wife being replaced. She was a woman preparing herself for the moment the truth would no longer be deniable. Clara didn't yet know how deep Richard's betrayal ran, but one thing was certain. Her life was about to change forever. Clara Bennett's heart had always been her compass. It told her when Richard was sincere, when his smile carried genuine love, and when his words were hollow. By now, that compass screamed louder than ever. Something was deeply wrong. The mornings became the hardest. Clara would wake up alone, Richard already gone, his side of the bed cold and untouched as if he hadn't slept there at all. When she questioned him, he shrugged. "Work calls, Clara. Not everyone has the luxury of sleeping in." The words cut her deeply, not because of their content, but because of the icy tone that once carried warmth. Then came the day when Clara returned home earlier than expected. The house smelled different, freshly cooked food, but not by her hands. The faint sound of laughter drifted from the kitchen. As she stepped inside, her stomach turned. There was Richard, seated comfortably at the dining table, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up, while Isabella Ruiz served him dinner as though she belonged there. For a moment, Clara froze in the doorway, her hands trembling. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. What is going on here?" Richard looked up, irritation flashing across his face instead of guilt. "Clara, don't start. Isabella was just helping out. You're imagining things again." His dismissal stung worse than the scene itself. Isabella stood there silently, her eyes lowered, but Clara caught the faintest trace of a smile tugging at the woman's lips. That night, Clara didn't sleep. She lay awake, listening to Richard snore peacefully beside her, while tears soaked her pillow. It wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation, playing out in her own home, under her own roof. The following week, the cracks widened. Richard stopped hiding his closeness with Isabella. He praised her openly, saying things like, "She understands me, Clara. She brings me peace, something you haven't done in years." Those words didn't just hurt. They shattered the very foundation Clara thought her marriage was built on. The final straw came on a rainy Friday evening. Clara returned from visiting her mother to find her suitcase packed and placed by the front door. Richard stood there, arms folded, expression cold and resolute. "This isn't working anymore," he said flatly. "I think it's best if you stay with your sister for a while." Clara's breath caught in her throat. You're kicking me out from my own home." "This house doesn't feel like home with all your constant suspicion and drama," Richard replied without blinking. "Isabella brings calm. You bring chaos. I need peace." Clara's knees nearly gave way beneath her. She had sacrificed years of her life, supported his dreams, built this life brick by brick alongside him, and now he was casting her aside as though she were nothing more than an inconvenience. Isabella appeared from the hallway then, holding a vase of fresh flowers as if she were the rightful lady of the house. Her eyes met Clara's briefly, and for the first time, there was no attempt to hide the triumph in her gaze. Clara wanted to scream, to throw the suitcase at Richard's feet, to demand he remember the vows they had made. But her pride, what little remained, held her back. Instead, she lifted her chin, swallowed the lump in her throat, and said only, "You'll regret this, Richard. One day you'll regret everything." With trembling hands, she picked up the suitcase and stepped out into the rain. Each drop that soaked her face felt like the world mourning with her. Yet beneath the heartbreak, a flicker of something new stirred inside Clara, a fire. For the first time, she wasn't just a wife being betrayed. She was a woman wronged, and wronged women don't stay silent forever. As she walked into the storm, Clara knew the battle wasn't over. This was only the beginning. The rain had not stopped all night. Clara Bennett sat on the edge of her sister Evelyn's couch, staring blankly at the suitcase that had been thrown at her like an unwanted burden. Her hands shook as she tried to sip the tea Evelyn made, but the warmth didn't reach her frozen heart. "I can't believe he did this," Evelyn whispered, packing the room. "Kicked you out for her. Clara, this isn't just betrayal, it's cruelty." Clara forced a weak smile. "I thought love meant something, Evelyn. I thought vows mattered, but maybe I was just naive." The words felt foreign on her tongue, as though she were speaking about someone else's life. Yet every image haunted her. The sight of Isabella in her kitchen, the sound of Richard's dismissive tone, the feel of the rain on her skin as she walked away from the home she had built with her husband. The next morning, Clara returned briefly to collect more belongings. What she found hollowed her to the core. Isabella's clothes hung neatly in her closet, her perfume lingered in the bedroom air, and framed pictures of Richard and Isabella now sat proudly on the living room shelf, as though Clara had never existed. Her chest tightened, breath shallow, but she refused to break down in front of them. Richard had the audacity to appear cheerful, his hand resting casually on Isabella's shoulder as though introducing her to a guest. "Clara," he said smoothly, "you should move on. We're all adults here. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." She looked at Isabella, who avoided her eyes but smirked faintly, and something inside Clara snapped. She said nothing, grabbed her box of memories and walked out. Yet as the door slammed behind her, she made a silent vow. "They may think I'm broken, but I'll show them the strength they've underestimated." Over the weeks, Clara tried to rebuild her life. She picked up extra shifts at the design studio where she worked, drowning herself in sketches and fabric swatches. But even in her busiest hours, the betrayal gnawed at her. At night, she lay awake replaying Richard's words. "She brings peace, you bring chaos." The cruelty of it all wasn't just in his affair. It was in how he stripped away her dignity, her home, her place in the world. And her parents, shockingly, seemed unwilling to interfere. When Clara confided in her mother, hopping for support, she was met with silence. Her father, avoiding her gaze, muttered only, "Richard seems happier now." Happier? That word echoed like a dagger. Her own blood, her family, seemed to side with the man who betrayed her, leaving Clara isolated in her suffering. But pain, Clara realized, could be fuel. Each tear she shed hardened into resolve. Each sleepless night forged determination. She would not vanish quietly. She would not allow Richard and Isabella to erase her. One evening, Evelyn found Clara seated at the dining table, papers spread before her, her pen scratching furiously across a notebook. "What are you doing?" Evelyn asked softly. Clara lifted her head, and for the first time since her world collapsed, her eyes burned with fire instead of sorrow. "I'm planning, Evelyn. If Richard thinks he can replace me so easily, if Isabella believes she can step into my life without consequence, they're both mistaken. This isn't the end of my story. This is the beginning of theirs unraveling." Evelyn swallowed hard, recognizing that look, the look of a woman scorned but unbroken, a woman ready to fight back. Outside, the storm clouds cleared, leaving the night unnervingly calm. Clara stared through the window, her reflection fractured by the glass. She whispered to herself, almost like a promise, "You may have taken my home, Richard, but I will take everything you value in return." And with that vow, Clara's heartbreak began its transformation into something far more dangerous: revenge. Clara Bennett had always been the quiet one, the peacemaker at family gatherings, the loyal wife who sacrificed her own ambitions for Richard's career. But betrayal has a way of reshaping a person, sharpening their edges until they cut deeper than anyone expects. Weeks had passed since she was cast out of her own home, yet Richard's arrogance only grew. He flaunted Isabella on social media, their pictures framed in cozy restaurants and weekend getaways. Friends who once admired Clara now whispered behind her back, many siding with the charming lie Richard spun. Clara was unstable. Clara was difficult. Clara drove him away. At first, the rumors crushed her. But then she realized something. Richard had given her exactly what she needed: a stage. If he thought his web of lies would bury her, he had forgotten that truth, once unleashed, can be louder than any performance. Clara began gathering pieces of evidence, small, sharp fragments of Richard's double life. Emails he had accidentally forwarded to her years ago. Receipts tucked carelessly into his jacket pockets. Phone bills that showed late-night calls to Isabella long before the affair became public. She placed them neatly in a folder, her hands steady, her mind cold. Evelyn, watching her sister transform, grew concerned. "Clara," she said one evening, "you're scaring me. This path you're on, it's dangerous." Clara met her gaze, her voice steady. Dangerous was Richard betraying me in my own home. Dangerous was Isabella stealing what wasn't hers. I won't sit quietly while they destroy me. I won't just survive, Evelyn. I'll make sure they regret every choice they made. Her plan was simple but devastating. She wouldn't confront them with screaming accusations. She would dismantle their carefully built facade piece by piece. Richard prided himself on being respected in his firm, admired by his clients, and trusted by his colleagues. What better way to strike than to expose the rot beneath his polished exterior? The opportunity came faster than she imagined. Richard's company was hosting a gala, an evening of glittering dresses and empty smiles. Clara knew he would parade Isabella there, daring society to accept her as his new partner. It was the perfect stage for truth to take center spotlight. The night before the gala, Clara sat at Evelyn's kitchen table, rehearsing her speech aloud. Every word dripped with controlled fury, not desperation. She wasn't the abandoned wife begging for sympathy. She was the betrayed woman demanding justice. As the rain tapped against the window, Evelyn reached across the table, gripping Clara's trembling hands. "Are you sure this is the way?" Clara's lips curved into the faintest smile. "This is the only way. He humiliated me publicly. I'll return the favor." The day of the gala arrived. Clara dressed not in sorrow's gray, but in crimson, a color that spoke of both love lost and blood yet to be spilled, metaphorically. She styled her hair in elegant waves, her makeup flawless, her presence commanding. She didn't look like a woman discarded. She looked like a queen preparing for war. As she entered the ballroom, whispers followed her, some in shock at her appearance, others in anticipation of drama. Richard turned pale when he spotted her, Isabella clinging tightly to his arm. For the first time since his betrayal, Clara felt in control. She walked across the polished floor with slow, deliberate steps, her eyes fixed on Richard like a predator cornering its prey. The folder of evidence pressed against her side, heavy with truth, heavier with the weight of the storm about to break. And as the orchestra played its final notes, Clara prepared to silence the music of Richard's lies, forever. The day of reckoning had arrived, but instead of chaos, I felt a deep stillness inside me. For weeks, I had been preparing myself not for battle, but for peace. Revenge had once burned in my veins, but now it was something else, clarity. I woke early that morning, the pale sunlight streaming through the curtains, painting my room in soft gold. It felt symbolic, as if life was quietly whispering to me, "This is your new beginning." For the first time in months, my heart wasn't heavy with grief. I had carried betrayal, humiliation, and anger, but slowly I had transformed that pain into strength. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't just see a broken woman anymore. I saw a survivor. My reflection was no longer that of someone defined by her husband's lies or her family's silence. It was of someone who had rebuilt her own identity from ashes. I dressed simply, nothing dramatic, just a soft cream blouse and black trousers, but I felt powerful. No expensive outfit, no dazzling jewelry could compare to the confidence that now glowed from within me. That afternoon, I met Daniel one last time. We were in a public place, a quiet corner of the very cafe where we had once celebrated our anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on me. He looked worn out, his eyes tired, his words hesitant. "I never wanted it to end this way," he muttered, trying to sound sincere. I smiled faintly, but there was no bitterness in it. "Daniel, you ended it long before I ever knew the truth. You just didn't have the courage to admit it." His face fell. For years, I had been the one who carried his shame, his failures, his secrets, but not anymore. "I don't hate you," I continued, my voice steady. "I pity you. You threw away loyalty, trust, and love for what? A moment's thrill, a secret life built on lies. That was your choice, and now you must live with it. I, on the other hand, am free." The silence that followed was deafening. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but for the first time, he couldn't. Because the truth was undeniable. I had risen above his betrayal, and nothing he said could undo that. I stood up, leaving him behind with his regrets. That was the last time I saw him. Walking out of the cafe felt symbolic. Each step carried me further from the shadows of my past and closer to the light of my future. In the weeks that followed, I poured myself into rebuilding. Not just my career or my routine, but myself. I took long walks in the park, read books I had once neglected, and even signed up for a painting class. The strokes of color on canvas became therapy, every brushstroke releasing pain and replacing it with hope. Most importantly, I learned the art of silence. I didn't need to shout my story to the world or seek validation from others. My dignity, my peace, was mine alone. That was victory enough. One evening, standing on my balcony, I watched the sunset. The sky burned with shades of orange and pink, a reminder that endings could be beautiful too. For the first time in a long time, I whispered to myself, "I am enough." I didn't need revenge anymore. My greatest revenge had already been achieved, living well, stronger than before, untouchable by lies. As the stars began to appear, I realized something profound. The betrayal that once destroyed me had, in truth, freed me. It was not the end of my story. It was only the beginning of a new dawn.